So you're telling me that humans voluntarily live in these primitive settlements? Officer Zix-9 clicked his mandibles in disbelief, his antennae twitching as he surveyed the quaint Earth village before him. Officer Kraz-22, fresh out of the Galactic Peace Corps Academy, couldn't help but let out a chirp that sounded suspiciously like a snicker. Apparently they call it going off the grid or embracing a simpler life. Can you believe it? These Deathworlders choose to make their lives harder. The two Arthropodian officers stood at the outskirts of a small village nestled in the rolling hills of what humans called countryside. Their iridescent exoskeletons gleamed in the warm sunlight, a stark contrast to the earthy tones of the human dwellings. Zix-9 mandible shrugged, a gesture he'd picked up from his time studying human body language. We're here to observe and report. Let's see how these crazy mammals manage without their precious technology. As they ventured into the village, their protective suits whirring softly, they couldn't help but feel like they'd stepped into some sort of time warp. The wooden structures lined dirt paths, and humans moved about their daily routines with a surprising lack of urgency. Look at that one, Kraz-22 pointed with one of his lower appendages, using a primitive cutting tool to shape wood. How quaint. The human in question, a burly man with a magnificent beard that would make any folliculated hirsute jealous, looked up from his work and waved cheerily. Mornin' officers. First time in Willow Creek. Zix-9, the more experienced of the two, stepped forward. Indeed, human, we are here to observe your way of life. The man guffawed, a sound that made both officers' antennae vibrate uncomfortably. Well, ain't that something? Name's Tom Grizzly. Welcome to our little slice of paradise. Kraz-22 couldn't contain his curiosity. You call this paradise? But where are your quantum computers? Your fusion reactors? Your matter replicators? Tom's booming laugh echoed through the village. Son, the only fusion reactor I need is right up there. He pointed to the sun. And the only matter I'm replicating is the vegetables in my garden. Come on, I'll show you around. As they followed Tom through the village, the officers couldn't help but exchange confused glances. Humans of all ages were engaged in various activities, none of which involved advanced technology. And here's our community center, Tom proudly announced, gesturing to a large wooden building. We have game nights, potlucks, and even the occasional hoedown. Hoedown? Zix-9 queried, his translator struggling with the term. Oh, you're in for a treat. Tom's eyes twinkled mischievously. It's a dance. You know, where we stomp around to music and pretend we're not making complete fools of ourselves. Kraz-22's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of distress. You mean you intentionally engage in uncoordinated movement for fun? You bet your shiny carapace we do. Tom slapped Kraz-22 on the back, nearly knocking the poor officer over. Nothing like a good dance to get the blood pumping. As they continued their tour, the officers noticed something peculiar. Despite the lack of advanced technology, the humans seemed happy. They greeted each other warmly, worked together on various projects, and generally exuded an air of contentment that was puzzling to the alien observers. And this here's my pride and joy, Tom announced as they reached a small structure near his house. My workshop. The interior of the workshop was a chaotic array of tools, wood scraps, and half-finished projects. To the Arthropodian officers, it looked like a disaster zone. To Tom, it was clearly heaven. This is where the magic happens, he said, running his hand lovingly over a worn workbench. I can make just about anything here. Zix-9, ever the diplomat, tried to find something positive to say. It's very rustic. Tom burst out laughing. Rustic. I suppose that's one way to put it. But let me tell you, there's something special about creating things with your own two hands. Kraz-22, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly piped up. But why? Your species has developed nanotechnology that can assemble anything you desire. Why revert to such primitive methods? Tom's expression softened. See, that's where you're missing the point, little fella. It's not about having the end product. It's about the journey of making it. The officers exchanged glances again, their compound eyes reflecting their confusion. Look, Tom continued, picking up a small wooden figurine from his workbench. I carved this for my granddaughter's birthday. Took me weeks to get it just right, but every time she looks at it, she knows her old grandpa poured his heart into making something special just for her. You can't get that from a nano-assembler. As Tom's words sank in, the officers began to see the village in a new light. What had initially seemed primitive and backwards now took on a different character. There was a warmth here, a sense of community and purpose that was often lacking in more technologically advanced societies. But surely you missed some aspects of modern life. Zix-9 probed, still trying to reconcile this simple existence with the advanced civilization humans had built. Tom chuckled. Oh, don't get me wrong. I'm not against technology. We've got solar panels on most of the roofs, and old Betty down the road has a state-of-the-art hydroponics setup. We're not Luddites. We just choose to use technology as a tool, not let it run our lives. As if on cue, a young woman jogged up to them, her face flushed with exertion. Uncle Tom. The creek's rising faster than we expected. We might need to reinforce the bridge before the storm hits. Tom's demeanor changed instantly, his jovial expression replaced by one of determination. Right you are, Sarah. Officers care to see how we handle a crisis in Willow Creek. Before they could respond, Tom was already striding towards the creek, his long legs eating up the distance. The officers scurried to keep up, their protective suits whirring in protest at the sudden exertion. As they approached the creek, they saw a group of villagers already gathered, discussing the situation in animated tones. To the officers' surprise, there wasn't a hint of panic. Instead, the humans seemed excited. All right, folks, Tom's voice boomed over the babble of conversation. Looks like Mother Nature's throwing us a curveball. You know the drill. With an efficiency that would have impressed even the most regimented arthropodian military unit, the villagers sprang into action. Some began gathering rocks and sandbags, while others retrieved tools from nearby sheds. Kraz-22 leaned towards Zix-9, his antennae quivering. Are they enjoying this? Zix-9 could only click his mandibles in bewilderment. It appears so. How very human. As the villagers worked to reinforce the bridge and shore up the creek banks, the officers found themselves drawn into the activity. Before they knew it, they were passing sandbags along a human chain, their multiple limbs proving unexpectedly useful in the task. Hours passed in a blur of activity. The storm arrived with a vengeance, rain lashing down and wind howling through the trees. But the villagers worked on, laughing and joking even as they were soaked to the skin. Finally, as the storm began to abate, Tom called for a break. The villagers gathered under a hastily erected shelter, passing around thermoses of hot beverages and plates of food that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. Well, officers, Tom grinned, his beard dripping with rain and mud. What do you think of our little village now? Zix-9 and Kraz-22 looked at each other, then at the gathered humans. Despite the harsh conditions, every face wore a smile. There was a palpable sense of camaraderie, of shared accomplishment. It's remarkable, Zix-9 admitted. In the face of adversity, you didn't panic or call for external assistance. You came together and solved the problem yourselves. Tom nodded, a twinkle in his eye. That's the beauty of it, officers. In a world where you can have anything at the push of a button, we've rediscovered the joy of doing things ourselves, of relying on each other, of being part of something bigger than ourselves. As the sun began to peek through the dispersing clouds, the villagers started to disperse, heading home to dry off and rest. But there was no sense of the work being over. Instead, there was an air of anticipation, as if they were already looking forward to the next challenge. You know, Kraz-22 said thoughtfully, when we arrived, I thought these humans were crazy for choosing to live this way. But now you're wondering if maybe they're onto something. Tom finished with a knowing smile. The young officer nodded, his antennae drooping slightly in embarrassment. I don't feel bad, son, Tom said kindly. It's not an easy thing to understand if you haven't experienced it. But let me tell you, there's something powerful about knowing you can face whatever life throws at you with your own two hands and the support of your community. As they made their way back to the village center, the officers noticed small acts of kindness and cooperation everywhere. Beleaguers helping each other clean up storm debris, checking on elderly neighbors, sharing supplies and tools without a second thought. I must admit, Zix-9 said, his tone thoughtful, I've never seen anything quite like this. In our society, we pride ourselves on our efficiency and technological prowess. But there's something here that we don't have, a sense of connection. Tom nodded sagely. That's it exactly. Don't get me wrong, we're not perfect. We have our squabbles and disagreements like any community. But at the end of the day, we know we're all in this together. As they reached the village square, they found it bustling with activity. Tables were being set up, food was being prepared, and someone was tuning in an instrument that looked suspiciously like a violin. What's all this? Kraz-22 asked, his curiosity piqued. Tom's face split into a wide grin. Well, officers, remember when I mentioned a hoedown earlier? Looks like tonight's your lucky night. Before the officers could protest, they found themselves swept up in the preparations. Kraz 22 was put to work helping hang lights, his extra limbs proving invaluable for the task, while Zix9 found himself assisting in the kitchen, his precise movements perfect for chopping vegetables. So weight fell, the square came alive with music and laughter. The officers watched in amazement as the villagers, many of whom had been working tirelessly all day, now danced and celebrated with unbridled enthusiasm. "I don't understand," Kraz 22 said, his head tilted in confusion. "They must be exhausted. Why aren't they resting?" An elderly woman overheard his question and chuckled. "Oh, dearie," she said, patting his exoskeleton gently, "this is how we rest. We've worked hard, we've faced a challenge together, and now we celebrate that bond. It's good for the soul." As the night wore on, the officers found themselves drawn into the festivities. At first, they watched from the sidelines, their analytical minds trying to make sense of the seemingly chaotic movements of the dance. But gradually, encouraged by the welcoming smiles and gentle coaxing of the villagers, they began to participate. Zix9, normally the picture of decorum, found himself attempting to do-si-do, whatever that meant, with a group of giggling children. Kraz 22, meanwhile, discovered that his multiple limbs gave him a distinct advantage in a dance called the Macarena. As the moon rose high in the sky, casting a silvery light over the celebrating villagers, Tom found the two officers taking a breather at the edge of the square. "So," he said, a knowing smile on his face, "still think we're crazy for living like this?" Zix9 and Kraz 22 looked at each other, then back at the joyful scene before them. "I think," Zix9 said slowly, "that we may have misjudged the situation quite severely." Kraz 22 nodded vigorously. "Indeed, there is clearly more to this lifestyle than we initially understood. The sense of community, the shared purpose, the joy in simple pleasures, it's all quite fascinating." Tom laughed, a warm, rich sound that seemed to encapsulate the spirit of the entire village. "Well, officers, I'm glad you're starting to see things our way. But let me tell you, this is just the tip of the iceberg." As the night wore on, Tom regaled the officers with tales of village life. He told them about the time the whole community came together to build a new schoolhouse, working day and night to have it ready for the start of the school year. He shared stories of harvests and festivals, of weddings celebrated by the entire village and funerals where every resident turned out to pay their respects. "You see," Tom explained, his eyes twinkling in the moonlight, "what you're seeing here isn't just a group of humans living without advanced technology. It's a community in the truest sense of the word. We rely on each other, we support each other, we celebrate and mourn together." Zix9 nodded thoughtfully. "It's quite remarkable. In our society, we've achieved incredible technological feats, but I fear we may have lost something along the way. This sense of belonging." "Exactly," Tom exclaimed, slapping the officer on the back, gently this time, having learned from his earlier encounter with Kraz 22's exoskeleton. "Don't get me wrong, we're not against progress, but we believe that true progress isn't just about making things easier or more efficient. It's about enriching our lives and our relationships." As the party began to wind down, the officers found themselves helping with the cleanup. To their surprise, even this mundane task was approached with good humor and camaraderie. Jokes were exchanged, impromptu songs were sung, and before they knew it, the square was spotless. "You know," Kraz 22 said, as they made their way back to Tom's house, where they'd been offered a place to stay for the night, "I think I understand now why humans might choose this life. It's not about rejecting technology or progress. It's about finding a balance." Tom nodded approvingly. "You're catching on quick, youngster. It's all about balance. We use technology where it makes sense, but we don't let it rule our lives. We work hard, but we also know how to relax and enjoy life. We face challenges, but we face them together." As they settled into their makeshift beds, which, to their surprise, were quite comfortable, the officers found themselves reflecting on the day's events. "Zix9, Kraz 22 said quietly, "Do you think our report will do justice to what we've seen here?" The senior officer was silent for a moment. "I'm not sure any report could fully capture this experience," Kraz 22. "But we must try. The Galactic Council needs to understand that there's more to human resilience than their ability to survive on a death world. It's this spirit of community, this joy in the face of adversity, that truly sets them apart." As they drifted off to sleep, lulled by the unfamiliar but somehow comforting sounds of the village at night, both officers knew that their perspective had been irrevocably changed. They had come to study how a Deathworlder manages life in a village, but they were leaving with a newfound respect for the human spirit and a deeper understanding of what it means to truly live. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the storm of the previous day nothing but a memory. As the officers prepared to depart, they found the entire village gathered to see them off. "Now don't be strangers," Tom said, shaking their hands or approximations thereof vigorously. "You're always welcome in Willow Creek, and who knows, maybe next time you visit, you might decide to stay a while longer." Tom finished with a wink. Zix-9 and Kraz-22 exchanged a look that spoke volumes. The idea of staying longer in this quaint human settlement would have seemed preposterous just a day ago. Now it didn't sound half bad. We shall consider it," Zix-9 said, his mandibles clicking in what the villagers had come to recognize as a smile. As they prepared to board their sleek Federation-issue hover vehicle, Kraz-22 turned back to the assembled villagers. "Before we depart, I must ask, how do you manage the more, dangerous aspects of your death world? Surely living so close to nature exposes you to considerable risks." A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd. Tom stepped forward, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Well now, that's a story in itself. Why don't you stick around for breakfast? I promise you the tale of how we handle our dangerous wildlife is worth hearing." The officers hesitated for a moment, their sense of duty warring with their newfound curiosity. Finally, Zix-9 made a decision. "Very well. I believe our report would benefit from further observation." Cheers erupted from the villagers, and before they knew it, the officers were being ushered towards the community center, where tables were already being set up for a communal breakfast. As they settled in, platters of food began appearing. The officers watched in fascination as the humans piled their plates with an assortment of items that to arthropodian sensibilities seemed wildly incompatible. Sweet pastries next to savory eggs, fruits alongside meat products. It was a sensory overload. "Now then," Tom said, taking a seat across from them with a plate that seemed to defy the laws of physics in its towering construction, "you wanted to know about how we handle the dangers of our death world, eh?" Kraz-22 nodded eagerly, his antennae twitching in anticipation. Tom took a long sip of his coffee, clearly savoring the moment. "Well, let me tell you about the Great Raccoon Invasion of 22. As Tom launched into his tale, the officers found themselves drawn in despite their initial skepticism. The story, it turned out, was equal parts hilarious and impressive, detailing how the village had banded together to outsmart a particularly clever group of raccoons that had been terrorizing their garbage cans and vegetable gardens. And that's when little Timmy had the idea to use the motion-activated sprinklers Tom was saying, gesticulating wildly with a piece of toast. You should have seen those raccoons' faces when they got blasted with water every time they tried to raid the compost heap. The officers were fascinated. This was problem-solving on a scale they hadn't anticipated. No high-tech force fields, no lethal countermeasures, just good old-fashioned human ingenuity and a hefty dose of humor. "But surely," Zix-9 interjected, "you face more serious threats than these raccoons? What about the large predators we've heard so much about?" Tom's expression grew more serious, but there was still a twinkle in his eye. "You mean like bears and mountain lions? Well, we've had our share of encounters, that's for sure. But you know what? We've learned to coexist." He went on to explain the village's approach to wildlife management. It was a holistic system that involved everything from proper food storage to community education programs. They even had a local wildlife response team trained in non-lethal deterrent methods. "The key," Tom explained, "is respect. We respect their territory, and they generally respect ours. When there is conflict, we try to resolve it in a way that's safe for both parties." As the officers listened, they began to understand something profound about the human approach to their death world. These villagers didn't see themselves as conquerors of nature, nor did they cower in fear from it. Instead, they viewed themselves as part of the ecosystem, working with it rather than against it. "But what about diseases?" Kraz-22 asked, remembering the briefings they'd received about the myriad of microscopic threats that made Earth so dangerous. "Surely living so close to nature exposes you to all sorts of pathogens." This question sparked a lively debate among the villagers. It quickly became clear that while they took health seriously, they also had a remarkably balanced view of the risks. "Look," said Sarah, the young woman they'd met during the storm, "we're not ignorant of the risks. We have modern medical knowledge, we practice good hygiene, and we have access to healthcare when we need it. But we also believe that some exposure to our environment helps build a strong immune system." She went on to explain their approach to health, which blended modern medicine with traditional practices and a heavy emphasis on prevention through diet and lifestyle. As the breakfast stretched into the late morning, the officers found themselves inundated with stories and information. Each tale, each explanation seemed to peel back another layer of complexity in the humans' relationship with their death world. They heard about the local herbalist who worked in conjunction with the nearest hospital, combining Earth's potent plant-based remedies with modern medical techniques. They learned about the village's early warning system for extreme weather events, a clever mix of high-tech sensors and good old-fashioned weather lore. But perhaps most impressive was the story of how the village had handled a particularly nasty outbreak of flu the previous winter. Instead of panicking or isolating themselves completely, they had organized a system of community care. Those who were well took turns checking on the sick, delivering meals, and ensuring everyone had what they needed. They had turned a potential crisis into an opportunity to strengthen their community bonds. As the tales wound down and the villagers began to disperse to their daily tasks, Zix-9 and Kraz-22 found themselves sitting in contemplative silence. The wealth of information they had gathered was overwhelming, but more than that, they were struck by the fundamental shift in their perception. "You know," Kraz-22 said finally, his voice low, "I think we've been looking at this all wrong." Zix-9 tilted his head questioningly. "We've been so focused on how humans survive on a death world," Kraz-22 continued, "that we missed how they thrive on it. This isn't just survival, it's a complex, rich way of life that's deeply connected to their environment." Zix-9 clicked his mandibles in agreement. "Indeed, it seems we have much to learn from these humans. Their resilience isn't just about physical adaptations or technological solutions. It's about community adaptability and a profound understanding of their place in the natural world." As they finally prepared to leave, for real this time, the officers found themselves reluctant to go. They had come seeking to understand how a Deathworlder manages life in a village, but they were leaving with so much more. Tom stood at the edge of the village, watching as they boarded their hover vehicle. "Remember," he called out, "you're always welcome here, and next time bring some friends. We'll show them how we handle the annual Squirrel Olympics." As they lifted off, watching the village shrink beneath them, Zix-9 and Kraz-22 knew their report to the Galactic Council would be unlike any they had ever written. How could they possibly convey the warmth of community, the joy in shared challenges, the deep respect for nature that they had witnessed? But they knew they had to try, because understanding how humans not just survived, but thrived on their death world was key to understanding humanity as a whole. As Earth's atmosphere gave way to the blackness of space, Kraz-22 turned to his superior. "Zix-9," he said, a note of wonder still in his voice, do you think we could request a longer-term observation assignment? I feel like we've only scratched the surface." Zix-9's compound eyes seemed to twinkle with an almost human-like amusement. "You know, Kraz-22, I was thinking the exact same thing. After all, we still need to see how they handled the Squirrel Olympics." As their ship entered hyperspace, both officers chuckled, a sound that would have been unthinkable just a day ago. They had come to study Deathworlders, but they were leaving as students of humanity, eager to learn more about this fascinating, paradoxical species that called the most dangerous planet in the galaxy home. And back in Willow Creek, as the villagers went about their day, they shared knowing smiles. They had seen it before, the gradual shift from bewilderment to understanding in the eyes of their galactic visitors. They knew that somewhere out there, 2 arthropodian officers were about to submit a report that would challenge everything the Galactic Council thought they knew about humanity. But more importantly, they had made new friends, and in Willow Creek that was always worth celebrating. As the sun began to set, the faint sounds of a fiddle could be heard in the village square. After all, why wait for the next crisis to have a hoedown? In the grand tapestry of the galaxy, Earth might be classified as a death world. But to those who called it home, it was simply where life, in all its messy, challenging, beautiful complexity happened. Then they wouldn't have it any other way.